Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Walk Magick video. Today I want to discuss a trend that we've probably all seen amongst select practitioners of Thelema, and it's a definite physical concern when walking a spiritual, magical path, which does take a lot of your time to dedicate to. And that topic is monetary gains and Thelemic magic. And what is the line between these? So let's dive in. Now, as an off-script thought really quick, it's, not lost to me that the U.S. right now, and potentially there's a global economic crash on the rise due to decisions that have been made. And I think it's almost uncanny and coincidental that I had started wanting to talk about this topic about 2.5 weeks ago, and I just happened to finish the script today, which is April 3rd, 2025, as Dow Jones, Samsung, Amazon, everything coming from China especially, which is the manufacturing capital of the world at this point. All of these markets are in free fall at the moment, and we don't know what that's going to be in a day, a week, a month, a year from now. But at the present, it could be scary. So let me just start off by saying, if you look at the book of the law, money, fear not. Chapter 3, Rahul Quid says, money, fear not. He also says, new is your refuge, as Hadit your light, and I am the strength, force, vigor of your arms. Right, so that's all in chapter 3. Those are tenets, commands for Thelemites to kind of lean on, live by, and prosper from, And so I'm going to dive into a whole slew of topics today related to money and Thelema magic. So first off, let me begin by saying that I only hold myself to these standards. You can take or leave whatever is in this talk, and do what thou wilt. And, even when we make mistakes, we learn from those mistakes, so there should be no judgment. The only time that mistakes need to be intervened against is when it's specifically infringing upon the rights of others. But I do believe that there are certain moral tendencies that I've seen, at least now with online culture, that, could be tuned up quite a bit or altogether changed. So I want to talk about a bunch of these topics. Now, so again, you could just take or leave whatever I say and do what you feel is best for yourself. I'm talking from my own perspective, and while I'll lean on some examples without naming names or creating drama, or giving too specific of a detail that it puts somebody on blast, that's not my intention, but it's just to share information, and you could do what you want with this information, right? Now, I may, as a human, slightly roll my eyes or even nod my head with downcast eyes when I see certain things. It's just my nature. It's many people's nature. When they see something that's like, oh, that's probably not good, you have that reaction. But again, ultimately, each person's karma is their own. Secondly, this topic is exclusively to Thelema. There are other traditions where selling a ritual is perfectly okay. And aside from that, I'm not part of any other tradition than Thelema at present, so this topic is exclusively for Thelemites, as those other traditions do not affect me. I'm not commenting on them. This is strictly Thelemic magic. As a Thelemite, you are of course entirely free to take what I have to say into consideration or disregard it altogether. My main aims are to point out certain factors where magic, money, and life are concerned, and offer experience and guidance on these matters if it helps anyone. Also, to shew where the line in the sand is between these things, at least in my opinion. Okay, so, to get this out of the way, an argument I hear is that I put a lot of time into doing magic and the great work, and I have to survive and pay the bills. That's totally fair. I can only share how I operate, and if you experiment, this may or may not work for you, but it works for a lot of magicians I've seen who have been doing this for many years and have successful lives and successful magical careers. So, I train in Bhakti Yoga. That's part of my Thelemic discipline, is Bhakti Yoga. union through devotion. I have unwavering faith that Nuit has guided me thus far into the journey, and she is not going to simply drop me on my head and walk away. It's not how it works. What I need will be provided that I do my true will, right? If I'm doing other things, I'm going to create a mess. If I ever starve in the future due to lack of money or whatever means, personally, I take it as a karmic learning lesson, ungrudgingly, and I'll trudge forward. In the 13 years that I've been practicing, studying, doing all of this, that has not yet happened. I can confidently say that I utilize chapter 3, verse 17, quote, "Fear not at all. Fear neither men nor fates nor gods nor anything. Money fear not," end quote. Keep in mind, Libre Libre, fear is failure and the forerunner of failure. So if you're making decisions based on, I'm not going to have enough, and there's a fear there, you need to take a look at where that fear is coming from and remove it. And lastly, before moving on, there is what's called the leap of faith. That when you need to do something you believe to be aligned with your true will, but do not have the funding for, and are getting stressed and don't know what to do to manage. What you can do, and it's on you if you do this and it doesn't work, right? I've done this and it has worked. But it's also something to be done sparingly. But you basically splurge everything and step forward blindly. You actually spend more than you have available. So I'll give an example. Say you need $100 for a prescription, but you only have $20. Spend that $20 on what else you will and go about your business. You'll end up stumbling into something by chance that will end up giving you more than what you needed. Now, again, keep in mind, this is only for things aligned with the true will, and should be used sparingly in emergency situations only. If you have a safety net, this is going to fail and you're going to have wasted your money and you're not going to get what you need. If you miscalculate your true will, it will fail and you'll go without that prescription when you could have done something else. But if you meet these requirements and jump off the ledge, Nuit will catch you. So there is that thing. I've done it. Crowley talks about this in 1 or 2 places. It's a thing. I've seen it work. But again, it's to be used sparingly, right? I didn't put this in the script. It's an afterthought. But there's also the fact that when you're doing your true will, at least in my experience, maybe it's just me, maybe there's certain things you could do to train your psychic center, but I get precognition foresight once in a while. And I just know, oh, that I need to do something here to make that happen, or I need to go there and that's going to happen. And I usually take that as that's very aligned with my true will. And so, I analyze the situation. I don't just do it stupidly most of the time, but I weigh it out and determine, is that in line with my path? And if that foresight vision is aligned with my true will, I do it. And so that goes with money too. There have been times where I don't stress anymore because I do a lot of little things every single day, and I just get that either a vision or knowing that at this time when I'm going to need something, this is going to come to me. And 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, that's exactly what happens. All right, so we live in a society where we are dependent upon some kind of income in order to meet the basic needs of survival: food, shelter, and clothing. To acquire these, one must perform some type of labor in order to gain money to pay for one's own survival. And because there is a will to live, and thou hast no right but to do thy will, one may assume that acquiring money is so important that there are no rules regarding it. But it is that very way of thinking which leads to greed, hoarding, and overconsumption. Plagues which riddle the globe amongst almost every culture. The solution, I would think, is to only acquire that which you need to do your true will. Anything else becomes useless. Sure, we all have wants, and we are free to dally with our earthly desires, but unless doing so is aligned with one's true will, it's extracurricular at best, or restriction of the true will at worst, as you distract yourself from doing the great work. In my view, the problem with monetary gains and Thelemic magic arise most prominently when the act of service to humanity, which is a duty of all Thelemites, becomes petitioned off by a paywall. A good portion of Thelemic ideology is, at its heart, founded on the line of Rosicrucian doctrine, which is, at its core, based on the idea of service to humanity and guiding the human race forward. When a Thelemite helps someone with teachings and ritual, but only if they pay the individual providing the service, is problematic. Of course, you may attend a public ritual or join an order, and there may be a donation required, or dues or fees, but so long as these are going towards rent for the space, supplies, etc., and not directly into the pocket of the person to pay for things unrelated to the service, such as a savings for a sports car or whatever, unnecessary things, unrelated things, then that's totally reasonable. The work pays for itself, and it helps people, and it keeps it going. It's the serpent eating its tail. But let me pause here and venture into the topic of online teachings before circling back to what I'm already getting at. I'll make a quick mention of people who do strictly scholarly and anthropological work. In these cases, I believe there is nothing wrong with making a monetized vocation out of the field. The subjects range from cultural to historical, translating text, and analyzing persons of interest, giving bios and documentaries on these and other subjects, primarily for historical documentation and accuracy. As long as they are not teaching how to use these fields by synthesizing the practices and administering the teachings of their research for the spiritual or magical progress of their listener, I see nothing wrong with their work. Religion for Breakfast is a great example of this genre. But in the case of Thelemites hosting channels, where they are discerning the doctrines of the Book of the Law, or texts and rituals of the AA, I believe there is a boundary being crossed. There is a stated value about money being taken for services prohibited by AA, as stated in One Star Insight. Quote, "There is, however, an absolute prohibition to accept money or other material reward, directly or indirectly, in respect of any service connected with the order, for personal profit or advantage. The penalty is immediate expulsion with no possibility of reinstatement on any terms soever." End quote. You might argue that if a person's not in AA, that this bylaw doesn't apply to them. Very astute. Even still, the material being discussed about the Thelema does come out as head order, and it is the nature of the work in question itself which is for the benefit of humanity. I'll talk about the idea of, paying for a book versus paying for a teaching in a moment, but my point here is, when you are putting a paywall in front of the benefit of a person who is seeking spiritual enlightenment, are you actually helping? When you're making a side hustle out of analyzing the spiritual, well, who in our occult history has done so and actually helped the human species? To sell a person anything spiritual for the physical benefits for oneself, well, how could that be justified? Are you trying to help people, or are you trying to benefit yourself? I believe that is the crux of the moral bankruptcy at the heart of monetizing spiritual instruction. When one is talking about the great work, which at the end of the path, which is really the beginning of the path of service, that service is being provided as a side hustle for their own benefit, thus lacks the fundamental component of service intended, and in my opinion lacks the understanding of the work which they are trying to disseminate. I have this channel, right, which you're listening to. And upon starting it, I had and never will have any desire to try to monetize it. I can make a job out of crafting short videos, pumping these videos, making better video production, getting a nice camera, doing background art department, set design production, getting ad revenue, selling t-shirts, coffee mugs, the whole nine. I could open courses and give privatized classes to people, spitting out a series of rituals to do with little to no oversight for the people who pay. I have these skills at my disposal. I gig work in theater and film, after all, and I've taught myself a lot on top of all that over the years. But when it comes to Thelema, and especially this channel, I do what I do out of service with the hopes of helping someone. So to me, it doesn't matter if there's 1 subscriber or 100,000 subscribers. If that one person is growing because of even one thing I've said, then I did what I willed to do. Besides, if I did all those things to monetize, I feel it would end up attracting people who are more into the show and are hoping to pay for microwavable enlightenment. Pop it in, 30 seconds on high, and you're all set. Good to go. I'm enlightened now. But I've always believed in quality over quantity. I don't want 100,000 followers who are not going to benefit from this, you know? We're not interested in the material, right? I also believe, you know, in quality over quantity, that a trickle of water will carve a mountain in half if given enough time. So I'm going to give an example now, without naming names and trying not to spark drama. I want this to, you know, I don't want drama, but there's learning to be done here. So I feel this is important. And it's an example that I think should be considered an extreme example, yet is probably commonplace today and shows exactly where our species is at, that this is thought of as applaudable. So a few weeks ago, I clicked on a video by a Thelemite making YouTube videos and posting to social media. So, you know, it was this video that I saw that was really what finally pushed me to make this video. So I skipped through it, I listened to a little bit, and I wasn't totally interested in what I was hearing. Maybe it was just that video, irrelevant. But what jarred me was that I then skipped ahead to around the halfway point and landed at the very beginning of a mid-video advertisement. Basically, they were promoting a privatized class with a paywall that they advertised as, you pay for this course, you tell them the most intimate moments of your life, and they would work with you to help you discover your true will. A new practitioner might think, wow, that sounds great. Someone is going to help me with what I believe to be the purpose of Thelema. And that right there is the problem. Thelema is a philosophy made tangible through the Book of the Law and practices as set forth by AA, an order available for aiding humanity's progress. The Book of the Law, and by extension Thelema, teaches how one can attune themselves to nature and, by doing their true will, no longer be at odds with said nature. It is held sacred in thought by Thelemites that were everyone doing their true will, all of the self-inflicted maladies plaguing mankind would cease. So in this case, the person is claiming they have the keys to ending a multitude of mankind's problems, and they're putting a paywall in front of that? This contradiction of motive already tells me that their selfishness alone is a factor which they have not yet worked out, and they are in contradiction to the progress of humanity in the aim of bettering their own situation. That's at best. At worst, they are preying on newcomers and know what they're doing. I don't know them personally. I have no way in nor will to determine which quagmire they're stuck in, but I understand enough to know that this is a charlatan, right? And I have no problem saying names, calling somebody out, telling exactly what I mean right to somebody's face. I don't like to be passive aggressive, but I also don't want drama, right? But I also see the potential for people to get hurt. So I'm putting this information out so you could be aware, because there will be more in the future. There will be thousands more, just as since Thelema started, there has been tens, if not hundreds, of people just like this. Right? And I have no problem saying any of this to the person's face. I just don't want drama on my channel, so I'm just trying to share information, right? And you could do with this what you want. You could think I'm completely wrong and pay for a course for somebody to tell you your true will. That's your decision. Maybe it works. Maybe that's what gets you there. Maybe that was your will and their will to do, and maybe I'm full of shit and completely wrong, but I don't know. I'm just seeing problems here that do not line up, right? I suppose you could use even a low spirit to figure out your true will. That could potentially happen. Whatever gets you there, gets you there. But at the same time, I'm just seeing problems with being of service versus profit motive, right? Let's apply this mindset to any person that teaches Thelema. Could you imagine an AA teacher implementing a rule that they would only answer your questions if you're their student and you pay them? I mean, it feels wrong, so that's a more extreme example, but, sometimes in statistics, you put something to the extreme and you get to see how absurd the median is, right, when you do that. Here, I'll go into a small tangent, and I almost didn't want to put this in, but I think it's also important. There's an acceptable OTO culture to pay certain OTO members to give a lecture at your lodge. Yes, this happens. People make there have been practitioners who have made a living strictly off of doing lectures at OTO lodges. Like, that happens, unfortunately. That's part of their income, and it's a steady part of their income. No one thinks this is a fucked up toxic behavior, that they're making an actual living on getting paid to give back to their community, which had given the knowledge they possess, and didn't charge them to receive it, other than perhaps dues or fees. But anyway, so of course people entered immersed in this particular subsection of the Thelemite community may end up thinking that if my elders are doing this, it's acceptable for me to do this. It's acceptable to pay for magical instruction in one form or another, right? So what about book dealers? In this case, you pay for a physical object. It costs money, labor, resources to produce a book. You're using physical means to get a physical object. That item may be instructional in nature, but it is a physical currency for a physical object. So I think books in general are great, but there's nothing wrong with books. Books are also in writing or art forms to boot. So, and today, especially if you don't have the money for a book, everything's available online on the most part. You can find PDFs to almost anything that's out, Mostly you're supporting a writer, not necessarily supporting a magician. They may be one and the same, but there's a definite, it's more okay than I'm going to sit down with this person who is going to instruct me to do rituals. You don't have to do those rituals when you buy a book, but if you're paying for a class, it's because you intended to do them because you're trusting this person to give you proper material. And I'll get into this in a second more, right? Just hold that thought on, because I'm going to go into that, right? I'm going to skip over something that I have written here because there's no reason to open up this bag of worms. For full disclosure, to explain my own motives, I make occult art and sell it, right? I'll put myself on blast. Much of it is just art based on my experience and observations. I make steles and Lamp of Invisible Light talismans as well, reproductions, right? I have made a vocation in part out of producing these. But again, it costs money to get the supplies. And again, I see it as a physical currency for a physical object. I'm not asking for money to teach anyone how to use these two particular items that I sell. In fact, many people have asked what a stele revealing is for, how to use it, and I tell them, you can put it on your altar, this is what it means. I even intend, to either bring somebody on who's more well-versed in hieroglyphics than I am, or give my own lecture on the stele revealing in the future at some point, right? And that's, I consider a teaching about this sacred object as opposed to, I'm physically producing this and you can buy it, and if you want to learn how to use it, I will do that part for free, right? I'm not making a talisman that are for any specific thing and charging it. I'm definitely not doing a ritual prior to giving them that stele, I'm not turning it into an active talisman. That's their work to do, and if they needed to know how to do it, I would tell them how to do it. I'm not selling it as a ritually constructed tool. Simply providing the labor in crafting the supplies and giving them to those who want them. What the person does with that item is their business. They could use it or not, right? They could treat it as art or not. In the case of a person who asks me to consecrate it, I would make a decision to either do it or not based on the situation, how I feel about that person. If I feel it, I want my attachment more closely into a consecration ritual and letting that person possess that item, I would consider based on the situation. I would never charge them for that service. I would never charge them to teach them how to use either of any magical item that I sold, right, as an art. I'd either tell them or not how to use them, what they mean, based on whether I felt that person is going to harm themselves if I give them that information, or if I want myself attached to that person that closely. That would be the only reason that I wouldn't tell somebody something, but I still would never charge them if I decided, I could give them this information and it's safe for them, right? Likewise with selling rituals or spells. Here's another, or even charged talismans, right, while we're at it. Now, while joining an order may cost dues and fees, that only is collected and should never go directly to any person, but should remain in the treasury and be put towards rent, equipment, and the goals of the order, being first and foremost the promulgation of Thelema and service through ritual or sacraments, as well as guidance and instruction. No member is profiting off of others' dues and fees, or at least they're not supposed to. It's another can of worms that has nothing to do with me anymore, but be careful where you give your money to with your dues and fees. There are certain places where you should look into where those dues and fees go and consider if it's worth providing those dues and fees. Essentially, that's like a communist collective structure in that sense. Everybody who's a member is contributing towards building their community and lodges or temples, what have you. I personally feel everyone should learn and do their own rituals, right? But being that we are not yet as a society at that point, many people don't know how to even banish, and that's fine. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't, right? Many years ago, an elderly friend of mine had a husband who had just passed away. Story time. In her home was a dense fog of sorrow. Her cats were all distraught, and the tension in the air was palpable. She was telling me and another friend that she was going to call a priest and ask him to bless her home. I immediately offered to cleanse it. I explained what I would do, including the LBRP, the Star Ruby, an incense consecration, and a private invocation of the archangels that I have at my disposal. I asked her to participate in small ways. When we were finished, she was clearly much more at peace. The space was calm. Her cats immediately cuddled up and went to sleep. In fact, it was the first time in 2 days her cats fell asleep. It was just, we both felt the difference. Now, she was used to dealing with Catholic priests, so she pulled out $40 and offered it to me, asking if it was appropriate. As my teacher and I were working under his private order at the time, which was founded on Thelema and the principles found in One Star in Sight, I told her that I cannot in any way accept payment for the rituals, but I was very grateful all the same. I think that providing a spiritual service through ritual should be done because it is aligned with your true will, and you should not accept money for it. That's my view. You could feel differently. Regardless, why I feel people should at least be hesitant to do rituals for others and why money should never be involved is simply because if a person is in a situation that they feel the need, they need to somehow get someone to get them out of by fixing their situation with a ritual, this ultimately deprives that person of the growth needed to cause the internal change so that they do not get themselves into that trouble ever again. So, there are situations where, there are gray zones. I could have taught her to do that ritual and spent the time doing it, or I could do it. Either way, I'm not going to take her money to teach her how to do that. I do believe everybody should get to that point, so it is what it is. Next, quickly, let's talk about some gray zones, astrology, divination, and courses of magic. In many senses, I don't think it matters much if these are monetized. With tarot and astrology, if you're doing readings for people, it often borders more closely along the lines of a therapy session. You may pick up intuitively certain bits of information that you then communicate, but is it strictly selling a teaching? Not really. I mean, maybe if you're running a course to teach somebody how to specifically use the Thoth Tarot, that's a little less gray zone, in my opinion, right? But if you're doing a reading for somebody, whatever, right? I don't personally charge, right? Can you stick to the script? So, can you do these fields without being a Thelemite? Certainly. You could do astrology. There are many types of tarot. You don't have to be a Thelemite to use tarot. I'm focusing strictly on the Thoth deck, but Thelemite could go into, tropical or sidereal astrology, do lectures, teach people how to read natal charts, run courses on that. I think it's more of a gray zone than it is, administering teachings that are aligned with path working and doing your true will. Slightly different. Definite, in my view, definite gray zones. Story time. My teacher told me before he had passed away that he had the same self-imposed restrictions against taking money for readings as he had then when I knew him as when he was in his 20s. But ultimately, when he was young, found himself broke and in need of money for rent. He was offered a position doing tarot readings and forecasts. He hesitated, but ultimately decided to act as angel through a tarot reading of whether it would be permissible or not to accept the position. He got approval and did so. So he did his readings at the shop, and he had a list of people to call or write and give them updates based on like retrogrades, debilitated transits, comparing their chart with what's going on in the current transits, things like that. So I recommend, if you're not sure about something, try to communicate with your angel and get an answer. I think that that's probably one of the best advices I could give on any of these subjects. If it's falling into a gray zone, ask, hey, is this permissible? And you'll either get a yes or no, and you could determine after that whether it's aligned with your will or not, right? With courses, I will say the main problem I see is that they are generally geared towards newcomers. So if you're going into a course on theurgy, here's the one example I'll give that's very direct. You remember that Hecate class that was circulating a few years back? Well, you're going to start invoking energies, you're going to do a series of rituals, and you may not understand what that is going to do to you, nor how to deal with it, nor what type of commitments, nor all of the little nuances that come with working with this particular deity. And you run a lot of risks of making mistakes because you're just diving right into this. Maybe there's a lecture or two, but in a lecture or two before you start, you're not going to get all of the information you need as a newcomer to not make so many mistakes. Even if you don't make mistakes, a lot of classes do not have a 24-hour support system in place. So that if you have your shit kicked up and suddenly you need to process it or be talked down off the ledge, you don't have that person there ready to assist you as you would if you had a teacher. You'll eventually learn how to deal with these things yourself, either way, whether with a teacher or doing courses or what have you. But there are safer ways to do it than letting a person you don't know tell you to do a bunch of rituals, give you little to no oversight, and then walk away with your money. I mean, if I put it like that, does that sound right? If it sounds right to you, well, have at it. If it doesn't sound right to you, that's what I'm trying to consider here. I think I've made my position clear for myself. And you, again, agree or disagree. If you don't like what's being said, click off the video. It is what it is. Reiterate, like in every point I've brought up so far, to each their own. Your karma is your karma. If it is your will to do something, that's your business. Just be aware of the karma you are making. It's some people's will to hurt themselves because they need to learn not to do that again. So be it. That's their business. All I want to suggest is that you should consider, if you want a world where people are selling Thelemic Magick, well, then keep doing that. If you feel taking the action of prostituting the Book of the Law and Thelemic grade work is a travesty and will lead to the degradation in the long term of these things, the Book of the Law and Thelema, then don't do it. Our actions are our own. We influence others with our actions. We cause change with our actions. What kind of change are you trying to create? Regardless, whatever happens to Thelema in the future, truth will live on. That's guaranteed. Eventually, when Thelema inevitably becomes what the Vatican has become to Christianity, a purified system will take its place, right? When Thelema eventually corrodes, or when it's just finished, when it's outdated to that point, so a purified system will take its place. Just consider whether your actions are helping or hurting that which you claim to be part of and you're wishing to share with others. All I suggest is taking a look at how you're doing it, or how you intend on doing it. What is service to you? Right? What is service? I think that's the main question that I'm asking here. What is service? Is service altruism, or is service, yeah, but only if you pay me? I mean, you decide for yourself. You make up your own definitions. You have the right to live by your own law, and you have the right to think what you will. Doesn't mean that you're right, doesn't mean that I'm right. We'll learn by our actions. I'm putting this out here now. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I get backlash for this. Whatever. It is what it is. I'm used to that. I think the last point I'm going to speak on is money spells, which I no longer do. I've tried just to, when I was younger, less experienced, and Yeah, let's dive into this. I don't do them anymore. I have no need for that. But yeah, doing rituals or making talisman with the intention of profit gains. Another gray zone. You must merely know if it's your will to do that or not, in any given situation when that chance arises. Which I suppose is the same as every topic I've spoken of, you could argue, that you need to know whether that's your will or not. Even if it was the wrong thing to do in the progress of your spiritual enlightenment, maybe it was your will because you needed to make a mistake in one way or another. Totally fine, totally understandable. We all learn eventually, whatever. I'm learning, right? I'm learning as I go along this lecture. Crowley himself had done a slew of money spells. And while at least he was very dedicated to the great work, and I'm sure he put a lot of that funding into survival so he could publish and teach, he ultimately had a hard life and was often broke, which it might say a lot. Of course, there's the axiom that poverty, chastity, and obedience are the way of masters. So there's always many factors at play, right? Still, I can share a few points. Money spells are, in my view, not free. You take, you usually end up owing. If that's understood, then okay, you accept the responsibility of your actions. The danger with money spells as I see them are that they, one, can be addictive. Two, if you need a money spell because you are suffering financially, well, something is wrong that you cannot make a living. Rather than fix what is wrong on that front, and become self-sufficient, you simply rely on rituals and talismans, or money spells, whatever. You're going to continue to have that problem which got you into that mess. So you're just putting a band-aid over a much deeper issue. And three, having not fixed that problem and continuing to do money spells, when eventually that check comes due, you're risking potential debt and calamity, right? So instead of working on that problem, you do money spells and you just start to rely on that. In that case, well, you've never fixed the issue, so you're not perhaps working on a better way of making a living and an income that's going to sustain your body and mind, right? And then on top of that, you're going to get hit with the karmic debt eventually. So if those two things, one, you're still broke, and two, now more debt and suffering comes on top of it, well, now you've got two problems instead of one. You might be able to mitigate it by just doing one spell, getting money for X, Y, and Z thing, and then determining, okay, now that I have this little bit of either a safety net or a cushion with I could feed myself, now I could fix that problem and really work on how I haven't been able to provide for myself or be self-sufficient, and then you can get into fixing that while you have that cushion. And then when that debt comes, hopefully you fix the problem of not being able to make an income, so then you could pay back karmically what you owed. You see what I'm getting at? So there are ways to do it, but it's very tricky, and if you're not aware of what you're doing, there's a good chance to hurt yourself. Now, if you understand all that and still feel it's your will to do something, you can do it. You're a Thelemite. Just be aware and responsible of your actions. Either way, you'll learn something. It's good to make mistakes because we learn from them. Ultimately, I find magic works best when used towards its higher purpose of union and alignment with nature, rather than strictly on fulfilling physical needs, or wants, in most cases. Of course, that does require taking care of the physical body, and that in present society requires money. Still, I do think there are plenty of ways of keeping the physical and spiritual planes and purposes separate. Of course, they intersect, and each person must decide for themselves when and how they will use ritual magic for the betterment of their physical situation. But, ultimately, I think magic is not strictly for those physical things, and not just strictly for our physical betterment, It's geared towards being aligned with nature. And when you're aligned with nature, you may still face problems, but usually those problems are growing lessons, and when you're trying to avoid those growing lessons, you don't actually get the benefit of that lesson. So sometimes you have to determine, there's no one-size-fits-all in life. Sorry to say that. I wish there was. I wish I could give a one-time rule, and this applies to that situation every single time. There are plenty of dynamic situations. Everybody's situation is very unique, and I'm sensitive to that. But yeah, so love is the law, love under will. I hope that this talk was interesting, gave you food for thought, and I'll see y'all in the next one.